24 participants. So I think maybe we should start the show, as they say in show business. And I want to welcome everybody to the First Coast Free Thought Society's monthly Zoom. We're an organization of individuals who prefer science and reason over religious dogma and fanaticism, serving the needs of the non-religious population of Northeast Florida since 1998. And this is a transitional year of self-examination for us. We're in the process of furthering our community outreach, updating our website, and creating new and exciting things that we've never done before. Our website is firstcoastfreethoughtsociety.org. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Meetup, and Instagram. Meetup, for those of you who may not know, is an easy way for us to facilitate up-to-date announcements for our events, and it's free. We have Secular Sunday in the Park, book and movie discussion groups, the Free Thinker newsletter, and we recently enacted an advocacy overview committee. Next month, our guest will be Samantha McGuire, the National Field Director of American Atheists. Save the date. It's Monday, May 17. Bring a friend and bring your comments and questions too. Now, I do have a question for you. Is anybody here new to the First Coast Free Thought Society? If you are you willing to say that? And if so, how did you hear of us? NPR, Folio, Facebook, other? If you'd rather not speak about it and you want to just send a Zoom chat saying how you heard of us, if you're new to us, I'd be grateful for that. Anybody want to say how they heard of us? Or
I was about to say that, if you can hear me, I was about to say that I heard about you guys from the atheist community of Boston, but now that I think about it, I'm not sure that that's true. I was doing some web searches for different atheist and agnostic groups around the Jacksonville area. I bought a house in St. Augustine and have not moved there yet. So I can speak sitting here in California that these Zoom meetings have been great. Otherwise, I'd have no connection.
Well, very good, Mark. Thank you for sharing and welcome. I appreciate that. Well, tonight, we're pleased to have all of you with us to welcome Dr. Julie Ingersoll, who is a professor and religious studies program director at the University of North Florida. She teaches and writes about religion and politics, violence, and the Christian right. She's busy. She has been contributing author of Religion Dispatches, The Huffington Post, and The Conversation. Her works have been cited in The New Yorker, The Washington Post, and The New York Times. And her books include Evangelical Christian Women, War Stories and the Gender Battles, and Building God's Kingdom Inside the World of Christian Reconstruction, published by Oxford University Press and NYU Press, available on Amazon. Both very reputable scholarly publishers. Now tonight, among the many areas Dr. Ingersoll will explore with us include the Christian right, evangelical martyrdom, and persecution rhetoric that is both a source and production of a troublesome and dangerous adversarial relationship with the world. There will be plenty of time for questions and a healthy Zoom chat at the conclusion of the presentation. Should you prefer, you may message a question via the Zoom chat feature. Please mute your mic until it's time to speak and know that we are recording for posterity. So let's enjoy the time, expertise, and insights graciously offered to us by Dr. Julie Ingersoll. Professor, we're eager to listen. Thank you. We are all yours.
Well, thank you. Oops, I think I'm muted.
No, we can hear you.
We hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All the stuff about getting Zoom working properly, right? It's so nice to be with you all. As I was saying before we got started, I used to do these things a lot, and I haven't done one in a year. And I haven't done one I teach over Zoom, but I haven't been doing this over Zoom. So this is really fun to see everybody, and it's nice to see some old friends and some faces that I have of people I have corresponded with but not met, and it's great. I'm trying out this way of sharing the screen with the PowerPoint. So if I mess that up, then please bear with me. Hey, it's April 19th. Do you guys know what that date is? Does anybody recognize anything from that date?
Oklahoma City bombing anniversary?
Yes, and one more thing.
I don't know the other
one more thing from violence, religion, and
Waco.
fighting. It's the date that the ATF and FBI finally attacked. It's complicated as to what exactly happened there at Waco.
Waco right,
Fire.
Waco.
Yeah, both of those things happened in April. There's this long history of kind of wild conflict between the far right versions of Christianity in the U.S. And the government around this time. The Boston Marathon bombing was April 15th, I think. The Columbine massacre was April 20th, right? So it's all right around these dates. Sometimes that's intentional. People trying to commemorate some act of violence that they're making into kind of sort of some larger point. I do have a PowerPoint here, but we're not. It's just I think that it's got some visuals that I think will be helpful, and it helps me kind of stay on track. But we're not wedded to it, so we may abandon slides here and there as we go through. So we call this talk Evangelical Teaching and American Radicalized Terrorism. What I decided to do with that was to think about the various aspects of conservative evangelicalism that play into some examples of recent religiously motivated violence that we could call terrorism. We can talk about that. And in particular, I think I'm going to focus in sort of on the insurrection of January 6th. That's not to say that that's the only place that this plays out, but it gives us a sort of nice frame of information to do an analysis with. So my last visit with you was in 2015, and it was right when my last book came out. Academic books take a decade or so, I'm still on target, honest I am. Obviously not as much as I wish I were. So there's that. From that research, at the end of that talk, I suggested that there were two themes coming out of my work that we should pay attention to going forward. One of them was there would be a rise in persecution and martyrdom narratives on the Christian right. And the other was this reframing of the concept of religious right to, by some Christians, to have so religious freedom became this argument in favor of some Christians used to legitimate the privileging of their own version of Christianity as part of civil society. So I want to play with those 2 points as we go through this. And I think I was kind of on target with with large framing of where things might go. So in terms of preliminaries, because some of you are well aware of the religious studies program at UNF, but some of you may be not aware of religious studies at all and thinking, why is a religious studies teacher talking at the First Coast Free Thought Society? And so one thing I want to make clear is that religious studies as an academic discipline is not religious per se. My training is in sociology and history. And we look at religion as a cultural, historical phenomenon that impacts the world, and we study how it does so. So it's not theological in any sense, and it's certainly not promoting religion, okay? A couple other things that I want to just set the stage with, to sort of foreclose the argument that it's not all Christians. Clearly, it's not all Christians that we're talking about today. It's not even all evangelicals, right? And not all of the people at the insurrection on January 6th will fit into this category that we're going to talk about that is a part of evangelicalism. So there were lots of secular groups and other kinds of things going on too. We did label this terrorism at the when we labeled the talk. And I think it's worth spending just a minute to think about the definition of that term, because we throw it around and we debate whether this thing is terrorism or that thing is terrorism without ever actually defining what we mean by terrorism. For me, and I teach courses in religiously motivated violence, the definition that I use is that terrorism is violence where the target of the violence is often not the audience, and it's to serve an ideological, some sort of ideological end. So when violence is perpetrated against particular people, to get everybody else to pay attention, to do something that the perpetrator wants done. And so in that narrow sense, I think you can call what happened on January 6th terrorism. I think you have quotes from all kinds of people in the media about how they were angry about their perception that the election had been stolen, and they were going to take the country back, and they were going to well, they threatened to kill people if their demands for re-evaluating the election results weren't met. We have an equally complex discussion we could have over what counts as religion. All religious studies courses start with this particular conversation. But just for our purposes today, I want us to recognize that when I'm talking about religion, I am not talking about theologies and beliefs. Often people want to draw a line between religion on one hand and politics on the other. And they've got this kind of implicit idea that religion is confined to some sort of belief system. In my view, I have no idea. Sorry. In my view, when
he's protecting the household.
I think we're okay, but there's nobody else here, and there's a noise out there, which is what's making my dog bark. But anyway, in my view, the theologies are rationalist justifications that follow on the sort of cultural developments. And when we look at religion in religious studies, we are looking broadly at the cultural developments. Okay, so much for preliminaries here. And let's see here. Okay, so I first started putting together this PowerPoint slide, and I had all these images of religious right Christians who were taking part in the insurrection and doing things that we would recognize clearly as kind of Christian practices. And first I put them all in a big collage, and then I thought, God, there's so much chaos there you can't even see them. So I want us to see how explicitly churchy this event was. And so I have interspersed these images throughout the PowerPoint. So they don't necessarily, the image that you'll see won't always pertain directly to the point of the slide, but by the end of it, you'll have seen all kinds of images like this one, where you have a group of Christians who have, or a group of insurrectionists who have made their way into the Senate, and they are on the dais, and they are leading the other insurrectionists in prayer, and those hands lifted are charismatics praying. It was, I don't know how closely you all watched all of this, but it was really something to see. It seems to me that a key part of understanding how evangelicalism became part of the backdrop to that insurrection, a key part of understanding that is understanding the close connection between conspiracy theories and this far right kind of evangelicalism. There's a book by Michael Barkin called The Culture of Conspiracies, which if you're interested in this stuff, I highly recommend. I use it in my class when I teach this. It's a terrific book. And it's a little bit old, actually. I think it's probably 15 or 20 years old, and it's still the classic on this. He starts by, okay, so what is a conspiracy theory? Because just because, there are laws against conspiracies. So that suggests that there actually are such things as conspiracy theories. So all conspiracies are not conspiracy theories, right? A conspiracy theory is an attempt to explain events on the basis of conspiracy. So Barkin says that conspiracy theories seek to delineate and explain evil. They view history as controlled by massive demonic forces, defined as other, and the result is a worldview characterized by extreme dualism. Now, by extreme dualism, he means that all of reality is divided into good and evil. There's no kind of in between. So you're either sort of on the team of God or QAnon, or you're one of the people who's part of the problem, right? There's no middle ground here. There's no neutrality. He says it's an organized group acting covertly, or a conspiracy theory perceives that there's an organized group acting covertly to achieve some malevolent end. And the conspiracy theorists see the universe as governed by design rather than randomness. So these are some of the key ways in which he defines conspiracy. And I think that you can see why there's an overlap between some forms of religion, in particular, this evangelicalism and conspiracy theories. They do blend together quite nicely. So here are some of the basic assumptions that Barkin says you find in conspiracy theories. Nothing happens by accident. Nothing is as it seems. Everything is interconnected. These systems are usually non-falsifiable and they are closed. And by that, we mean that that any argument that one might present in opposition to the conspiracy theory has already been somehow anticipated inside the theory so that it can be explained away, right? So unlike science, where something is falsifiable, right? Scientists will tell you that when they do an experiment that fails, that's as important as doing an experiment that succeeds, because falsifiability is a key component of the scientific method. These conspiracy theories, on the other hand, are non-falsifiable. There is nothing that you could present that would prove it to be not true. Importantly, these are a response to a perceived, sorry, there's a word missing, a perceived threat to culture or a way of life, a fundamental threat that's going to undermine everything that we believe to be true and everything that's important to us about our world. And it's both disconnected from reality, but also in many ways more orderly than reality. And you can see in the image that we have here, this is also from the insurrection. That flag in the center is a Christian flag. You see this flown at many evangelical and fundamentalist churches. Let's see, the Jesus is King flag. There were signs that also said Trump is president and Jesus is king. They were all on the same sign. Lots of interesting material culture from this event. So one of the really important components of the appeal. So when I teach this to students, what we start with is, so who would believe conspiracy theories? Because we run through all of them, right? You know, Pizzagate and the moon landing was a fraud, and you know the whole gamut of them. And so we want to think about the kinds of appeal that these, because people don't believe things just for no reason, right? There's something that's motivating this. There's something that is appealing to people. And Barkin does a wonderful job of explaining this category that he calls stigmatized knowledge. It's rejected knowledge in opposition to prevailing views. And it appeals to certain personality types. And I'm willing to bet every single one of you knows somebody who's like this. The very fact that everybody thinks that that's a kooky thing to believe is the thing that they like about believing it, right? There's some kind of appeal to setting themselves, there's a certain curmudgeonly kind of personality that likes to set themselves off apart from the rest of the world, and the degree to which the world perceives the knowledge as flawed in some way is taken as evidence in favor of its reliability. Barkin also talks about what he calls the cultic milieu. Now, in religious studies, when we talk about a cult, we don't mean the thing that people use that language for in sort of popular discourse. It's normally a term that is used without a real definition, right? It's just pejorative. It's only used, it doesn't have content. It's just used as a label to say that something is disapproved of. But Barkin is using it in an older way that draws a distinction between a church that's connected to the larger society and a sect that is challenging an established religious organization, and a cult that's trying to do something new, okay? But the important thing for the conspiracy theories is that it includes this broad subculture. It's more than a thought system. So if you know any people who are part of conspiracy theory worlds or taken in by QAnon, for example, it ends up kind of engulfing everything, right? So it is a systematic thought system, but it also starts to shape social interactions and the clothing that people wear, the places that they go, the conversations that they have. It sort of takes over all of a subculture rather than just being a thought system. is deeply hostile to authority and to expertise. And Barkin also talks about its fluidity. And we can see that in the way that a conspiracy theory like QAnon succeeded at kind of gobbling up all these other kinds of conspiracy theories and just incorporating them into its dominant narrative. Let's see here. More stigmatized knowledge. These are the types that Barkin gives us. I don't think we have to talk about those in detail, but I mostly kept this slide because I like the tinfoil hats on the cat. That's just too cute. The stigmatized knowledge appears compelling. The stigmatization is taken as evidence for its validity. It mimics mainstream knowledge, even as it renounces it. So you'll find, like in my book, I wrote about, I have a chapter on the rise of creationism. And creationism is very much framed as a conspiracy by atheist scientists who want to deny that all of creation was made by God. And so they have to hide the obvious evidence of the truth of creationism in order to promote their atheism, okay? But at the same time, they renounce the mainstream knowledge and science and everything. They ridicule scholars and PhDs, but at the same time, they themselves use all kinds of scholarly credentials, and they try to talk about having 18 degrees and teaching and on all of their publications that are in non-peer-reviewed journals. But they try to mirror mainstream scholarly knowledge, even as they are renouncing it. There's some interesting ways about how they do that we could talk about later if you like. And I think one of the things that happens when we look at these kinds of groups is people think of them as being irrational, when in fact they are not. Given a certain set of assumptions, they're actually intensely rationalistic. It doesn't mean they're rational and it doesn't mean they're right, but the form in which the thinking takes place models rationalism. So Barkin calls it rationalistic. Okay. At the same time that you have this stigmatized knowledge, you also have a millennialism that's central to conspiracy. Okay, let me do this a different way. I want to talk about Christian millennialism, and I want you to think about the conspiracy theory stuff that we just explored a little bit, okay? So millennialism in Christianity is the theological system that anticipates the end of time. And there have been divergent opinions about what this might look like through the history of Christianity, including some that think that the kingdom of God was actually established at the resurrection, and that this is the kingdom of God and things are going to get better and better and better until finally we have the culmination of the kingdom of God. That's one version of it. But the dominant version that you find all around us in our Southern conservative community and in part of the kinds of conspiracy thinking that led to participation in the insurrection is it's called premillennialism. And it basically says that things are going to get worse and worse and worse until everything just collapses. Maybe the Christians will be disappeared. They get raptured out and don't have to endure the worst of it. But there'll be this final battle between good and evil, and then evil will be destroyed. This is called apocalypticism. And if you were to start looking for churches whose members participated in the insurrection, you would find that they overwhelmingly came out of this form of millennialism. And if you think about it, it makes sense because all of cosmic history in these systems is a battle between good and evil and fundamentally a conspiracy, right? The atheists, all of us are over here conspiring against the dominance of the Christian worldview. And that it is that cataclysm that they are anticipating. And that's the kind of frame of reference that they take with them when they start to evaluate, who's really involved in trying to steal an election from the president that we think is ordained by God, right? So all of that conspiracy theory, all of that conspiracy thinking plays into millennialism really well. There's not a direct overlap between millennialism and conspiracism, but the two things are super, super compatible. let's see here. Okay, I think I missed one. Yeah, all right, sorry. So I want to come back to the 2 points that I left you with 6 years ago. The rise of this rhetoric about Christians being persecuted plays into it helps move people along a trajectory of just kind of going to work and going to church on Sunday and socializing in their neighborhood to being radicalized, right? If you can come to believe that Christians and fellow believers in America are in a place of actually facing persecution, and the rhetoric with which these folks do this is really, really amped up. They tell people that their pastors are going to be arrested and their churches closed down. And, even in this discussion about public health measures and what kinds of endeavors can be permitted indoors because they're necessary. And this discussion over whether churches should be exempt from public health measures that prohibit people from gathering inside during a pandemic, right? This was all framed as an attack on the religious freedom of the church. And you see here, depicted here, so these are some of the cases that have made their way into the courts where Christians have been arguing that they are persecuted in America. Cake bakers who don't believe in marriage equality and don't want to make wedding cakes if the people getting married are gay people. Same with floral arrangements and photographers. A lot of this started around the issue of weddings in the post-Obergefell, right after the marriage equality decision in Obergefell. There is a way in which that decision foreshadowed a conflict between these kinds of churches and public non-discrimination laws. And I think that it has heated up since then, and it's continuing to. And I think it's going to continue to be, it's going to be an important flashpoint for these, because there's a sense in which these Christians' understanding of what society ought to be like and what their place in the world is ultimately and fundamentally incompatible with a civil society that enacts broad protections for equality. And that's something else that we can talk some more about. But they say that those non-discrimination laws are ultimately going to challenge religious freedom. And given the way that they understand religious freedom, I don't think that they're wrong. I think they're probably right. Anyway, again, we can come back to that. And religious freedom is coming up anyway. So these are just some statistics about, obviously, the place of Christians in American society. Christianity is so dominant. I mean, this is stuff that you guys all know. But 70 to 85% of Americans identify as Christian of some sort or another. We've never had a non-Christian president. Only 9 out of 114 Supreme Court justices have not been Christian. The current Congress is 92% Christian, right? So the idea that we really are seeing some sort of persecution of Christians just seems preposterous. And so then you've got to kind of think through, okay, so if it's not a literal threat, then what's going on in the rhetoric and what purpose is that serving? And we're going to get to that. So this guy is kneeling and praying at, I don't know if I didn't really call your attention to other pictures though, did we miss any? No, we didn't miss any. Okay. This is more from January 6th. And let's see. Okay. So in the current project that I'm working on, I'm interested in how persecution and martyrdom narratives are kind of lifted out of the past and played out in our contemporary political discourse. And there's a historian, Candida Moss, who's got a wonderful book called The Myth of Persecution, where she really talks about how persecution narratives functioned even all the way back in the early church. Many of those narratives actually continue on through the death of the person who's supposedly a martyr and continues talking in the voice of the person who's being killed. So we know that these are not first-person accounts of a person's experience, right? These are stories that are told after the fact for a purpose, right? They're not just stories where people sat around a campfire and entertained each other. They were stories, and Moss makes a really good case that these are stories that were developed and promoted by the leaders in the early church for the purpose of establishing who was in and who was out in terms of orthodoxy, which really is in terms of power. So she says that martyrdom narratives serve the interests of the storytellers. And in the contemporary example, so I don't know if you recognize the woman down behind me here, but this is Kim Davis, the Kentucky Clerk of Courts, who got herself arrested by refusing to issue marriage licenses for same-sex marriages shortly after the Obergefell decision. The idea of persecution in this part of Christianity, not in all of Christianity, but the part that we're talking about, the idea of being persecuted is so central to the identity of what it means to be a good Christian. It's like when they look out at the world and they want to know if they're doing it right, persecution is evidence of the fact that they're getting it right. If they weren't being persecuted, they would think that they were doing something wrong. They were being too compliant with the world, okay? And so if and when they aren't being persecuted, there's a rhetorical necessity of creating a sense of persecution, because it's the very badge of what it means to be authentic as a Christian. But I think that there's more to it than just that. And so we have to ask what purpose it serves. And it seems to me that this narrative of persecution and potential martyrdom that really was cultivated from the 1990s on. So for the past 30 years, this has been something that it's always been there in the history of the Christian church, right? Protestants grew up on the Fox's Book of Martyrs. It's not new at all. But with the rise of the homeschool movement and the development of an entire evangelical Christian popular culture, you have lots of examples of the cultivation of a sense of persecution, particularly in young people. There's a whole Christian music industry that has videos, and just like the secular music industry, and there's a whole genre of those that are about the necessity of being prepared to give your life for the gospel. And I should have included at least one of those here, but let's see. Ray Boltz is one example. He's got a song called something about the Lamb, where he has all of these, the video is all these images of historic examples of persecution, from Stephen to, I don't know, it appears to be the Nazis hauling people out of a house. I'm not exactly sure, but images of the Colosseum and all of this stuff brought to the fore, where it's about being prohibited from praying in school, and the father getting arrested for violating, I don't know. But so the idea is marshaling these stories and bringing them forward and applying them to a kind of contemporary political issue for the purpose of escalating the heat about, so it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we don't have school-led prayer anymore. Isn't that awful? We ought to be able to do that, right? It's one thing to say all of that, but to get somebody to the point where they are willing to actually maybe commit violence in response to such a thing, you have to up the ante a lot. One of my professors who in grad school, who's written a lot on religion and violence, talks about the cosmicization of this. So it's one thing to have a dualism, right? There's there's good guys and bad guys in the world, and you can see that in any, I don't know, Western movie, right? But if you elevate the good guys and the bad guys to that level of angels and demons, or God and Satan and his minions, if you make this cosmic, there's no negotiating. There's no way to resolve conflicts by compromise. For example, you can't compromise with Satan. So once you cast these conflicts in terms of martyrdom, persecution, cosmic dualism, once you cast them in these terms, they become very difficult to sort of back off the heat and resolve in some kind of a peaceful way. All of this, so going back to the very beginning, When I left you in 2015, I suggested that we should pay attention to martyrdom and persecution and the fight over religious freedom. Some of what's fed into the way in which religious, at the time I was talking about an inversion, what I was calling an inversion of religious freedom. And I've rethought that language a bit, and that's also something that we could talk about. But for these Christians, they have inculcated an alternate version of history. And this gets to Susan's concerns about this new proposal for the Florida Department of Education. They call this Christian American history. And instead of seeking a sort of well-documented, grounded historical analysis that's peer-reviewed by historians, they tell a theological version of history, a version of history that's designed to show sort of God's favoring hand in American exceptionalism, right? So it's a mythic history, it's a theological history, it's a history that serves a different purpose than examining like change over time, which is what secular historians do. This is based in a version of truth that literally opposes pluralism. In their framing of truth, there are really only two sides. There's the biblical truth and there's everything else. And there's no middle ground. This is the dualism that we were talking about before. There's no neutrality. There's no way for a negotiated settlement. And they come to understand religious freedom as the freedom to maintain their form of Christianity as dominant in society. That's what they mean by religious freedom, is they go back to their alternate version of history and they say that the founders were Christians establishing a Christian nation, and freedom of religion is the freedom to maintain that theocratic grounding for American culture and society. Now, I'm sure that you all want to discuss that that's not a good reading of American history, and I'm all with you on that. We could talk about that if you want, but I don't find that to be a debatable point. But we're interested here in how does it work for them, and what's making what out of what framework do they develop their version of, because some people will talk about their version of religious freedom and just say that it's insane, right? Oh, well, they want religious freedom for themselves and nobody else. And that is true, but there's more going on underneath it than just that. And in fact, I have these are two quotes. I've got two thinkers from my book. And these are quotes that I showed you last time, but I think that they're important enough to bring them back. So this guy Rushdoony, who was the main figure in my book, wrote a book in 1963. So this is a long time ago, called The Nature of the American System. And in it, he talked about what he called the attack on religious liberty. He says, first, the state is secularized in the name of freedom. And second, every prerogative of the church is attacked. This is exactly how you see them understanding what's happening. He anticipated the revocation of tax exemption that began with requiring filing of papers. And if you followed the discussion in the Hobby Lobby case, this is where the Supreme Court ruled that this private business could have a religious exemption from the Affordable Care Act requirement of covering contraceptives, okay? And this Catholic organization, the Little Sisters of the Poor, filed a subsequent case that they won, arguing that merely being required to file a paper that said that they were religiously opposed to providing contraceptive coverage, that by itself violated their religious freedom. And this is the kind of thing that Rushdoony was talking about in the 60s. And then that last quote's okay. So here's another of these key figures in that movement that I write about. And these are two books from 1982 and 89. And this is a figure named Gary North. Some people may have heard of him. But this is what he said. So let us be blunt about it. We must use the doctrine of religious liberty to gain independence for Christian schools until we train up a generation of people who know that there is no religious neutrality, no neutral law, no neutral education, and no neutral civil government. And then he's talking about the generation of kids. So sorry. and those kids, having been raised with this in mind, will get busy constructing a Bible-based social, political, and religious order that finally denies religious liberty to the enemies of God. And I just don't know what to do. I'm sorry. It's working at home. But I think this kind of encapsulates their understanding of how this works. I'm gonna skip that one, although it's something we could talk about, right? We were talking about the evangelical teachings that lend themselves to the rise of the religiously justified violence and terrorism that we see on the far right. And certainly their anti-science framing is crucial, from the rise of creationism to their focus on vaccines. They treat science as an atheistic conspiracy. So this is the last slide. The result of all of that is a deep ambivalence about democracy with some authoritarian tendencies that I find really disturbing. You can trace this all the way back to the influence of Southern Presbyterianism in the South before the Civil War, with the justification of slavery, which gave rise to the Southern Baptist Convention, which was founded in defense of slavery. That version of Christianity was deeply critical of any kind of social equality or egalitarianism. So that included Black people and slaves, but it also included women, non-landowning men, various ethnic groups. So most of us these days give a sort of broad assent to the values of equality. This worldview, this version of Christianity at its roots challenges that. It says the egalitarianism, that the social order as it exists was ordained by God, and efforts at egalitarianism are actually labeled as heresy. They're deeply suspicious of expertise. And they're concerned that democracy, they don't have a specific form of government that they, well, certainly there's a theocratic impulse, we have this. But in terms of in terms of how a theocratic government might be run or what it might look like, they don't necessarily have a strong commitment to any particular form of government. In fact, many of them find a monarchy quite appealing. They don't necessarily think that democracy is strong enough to hold back liberalism and secularism. And they are far more concerned about the loss of, they're far more concerned about losing ground to liberalism and secularism than they are protecting democracy. There's a deep ambivalence there about democracy. And so I'm sitting where the slides are, but you can see this guy here on the ground praying behind the big cross with the Trump flag over him. It's one of the more effective images, I think. So that's kind of the end of what I prepared to talk to you about to set the stage. But I'm really looking forward to conversation and questions and comments. And I'm going to undo the screen share so we can see. I think I'm going to undo this.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ingersoll. Very, very well presented. This group typically is very inquisitive. We want to open it up for questions now. They're not typically shy. They're often articulate, not always, but they do their best. We try. So who wants to start it off? Okay, the first person up is Jeanette Emerson. Jeanette, it's your show. What do you got?
Hi. You had mentioned that some of I think there have been several atheist presidents. I don't know that, but I suspect that some of the founders might have been non-believers. I think Trump is an atheist, to be quite honest with you. I just think he's a very amoral human being, but I don't believe that he's religious, but that's just my thinking. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts as to how we can what we can do, is particularly around education in our public schools, because what's happening in what is it, Alabama, Mississippi, one of those states, they're really doing some making changes in their curriculum that is frightening, and Florida will be next. I'm absolutely sure of it. So what can we do?
Well, Florida's already there and has been for a really long time, because we already give tax dollars to far-right Christian schools through our voucher program, in a way that's really problematic, in my opinion. I'm not the best person to, like, I spend all my time, like, in the darkness. So it's really good that we have a division of labor. Some of my best friends are, I consider them Pollyanna-ish, but I don't know. I'm not the
Can
person.
I ask one follow-up question then, and then I'll yield back all the rest. But anyway, if it's all right. I'm going to go ahead and acquiesce. Thank you.
Okay. All right,
I'm sorry I didn't have a better answer for you.
We've got two people in line. Can you qualify before we go to Susan and then Henry, what you mean by you spend much of your time in the darkness?
Well, I spend all my time reading these people.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I spent all of yesterday reading the ideological origins of the dirty war. It's the fascists in Argentina.
I was worried about your electric bill, but it's something else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Susan, what do you have?
So I did want to ask about, there's a new set of standards that the Florida Department of Education has proposed. And I think Florida Department of Education Commissioner Cochran, I think is his name. I assume he has the backing of Governor DeSantis. And I wanted to know your opinion on these. One of them reads, recognize how Judeo-Christian values influenced America's founding ideals and documents. Then it goes down a little bit to tell people that Judeo-Christian values include rule of law, God-given rights, quality of mankind, limited government, separation of powers, consent of the government. So it appears that they want to put into civics class to tell people what their own religion says. So how scary is this, I guess, is my question. And for anybody that wants to read all these things that they want to put in civics education, it's on the Free Thought Society website and legislative advocacy, and hopefully Dr. Ingersoll will encourage you to complete the survey.
Good plug.
I didn't know about this until you called my attention to it on Twitter. So thank you for that. I think it's very disturbing. It's absolutely not correct. Christians, forget about Judeo-Christians. I don't even think that's a thing, right? This is a framework that some sorts of Christians came up with in order to try to look like they were pluralistic when they really weren't. I never hear Jewish people talking about Judeo-Christian. It's just like it's like the colonizing of Judaism by Christianity in ways that as I understand it, most Jews find to be kind of offensive. So I don't even think Judeo-Christian is a thing. And the list of viewpoints that they claim come out of this aren't even agreed upon by Christians, let alone Jews and Christians, as though you could actually, the standards are terrible. Yes, oppose them. I think you're probably right. I'm sure the DeSantis administration, I mean, given the stuff that they've been doing lately, this is probably par for the course, but they're terrible. They're just plain wrong. I mean, like incorrect wrong, in addition to being other kind of wrong.
Okay. Henry, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
All right. Go ahead. What's your question?
So my question is about the way that this form of evangelicalism, is very hard right ideology, sort of intersects with a greater white supremacist and white dominionist ideology. Because it seems like these two things seem to travel together. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I can. So the book that I wrote is about dominionism. That's so I've taken a lot out of that for the talk for today. But to talk a little bit more about white supremacy, because I think that that's the way in which white supremacy and this form of Christianity are so deeply intertwined, I think is really, even among scholars of religion who are concerned about such things, is really something that we're really beginning to come to terms with. A couple of new books out on this that I think are really good. Robbie Jones wrote, he's with PRRI, and he has a book. It's kind of a mix between a memoir and a history. He's a Southern Baptist himself, went to Southern Seminary, but has come around to see the degree to which his own tradition is deeply racist. He's a pollster. So he does polling where he can actually kind of account for some of the other concerns that are mixed in there and find the degree to which the teachings of his own tradition are just so wrapped up with white supremacy. And that's a really good book. And then Anthea Butler has a new book out on white evangelical racism. And it's also terrific, kind of traces the history of this movement and shows its connection with white supremacy. In fact, both of them have been in a number of sort of podcasts, web interviews, those sorts of things lately. In fact, I think there was one where they were even both there. So it's Anthea Butler and Robert Jones. And there's a great conversation between the two of them on that point. I'm learning a lot from both of them on this question. So very much wrapped up in those two things.
Thank you for
Henry,
that.
any follow-up? Are you okay?
Maybe just one quick follow-up. Obviously, evangelicalism isn't purely a white phenomenon, right? There are naturally Black evangelicals, Hispanics, etc. But we never see, I guess, and this is sort of, we just talked about it, right? The fact that the white side is the racism and the evangelicalism, but it's just.
Well, that's a complicated question because it gets back to how you're defining things, right?
Right.
So when I've talked and written about evangelicalism, I am talking about what we are now specifying as white evangelicalism. And I don't see Black conservative Protestant Christians as evangelicals. I see them as something else. And the only way that you get, the only way that you pull those two things together is if you restrict your definition of what is an evangelical to a theology, which I reject doing. But the people who want, okay, so here's what's going on with that back and forth. It sounds like disciplinary navel gazing, but it actually, here's what's really happening, is evangelicals have found that they are getting a lot of criticism for racism. So all of a sudden they want to make sure that everybody knows that there are Black evangelicals. Well, so they use this definition, it's called Bebbington's quadrilateral. So this guy Bebbington came up with these 4 beliefs. So it's the centrality of the Bible, centrality of conversion, social action, and one other thing. So these are the 4 points that they call evangelicals. And if you define evangelicalism as holding to those 4 views, then yes, there are Black evangelicals. But frankly, that's a terrible definition because all Christians believe most of those things. And nothing there will account for the fact that 80 some odd % of these people voted for Donald Trump. So it's not a good definition, but it's a useful definition if you're an evangelical and you're trying to maintain your tradition and trying to protect it from the challenges of racism, right?
Right.
So in my view, it's a rhetorical strategy.
Okay, very good. Let's go to Karen and Steve. You've got a question or a comment? Unmute yourself. You're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, there were a lot of, I know that the presentation, you had to do some generalities, and And there were some that really bothered me. Was like, one statement was, there's no pluralism in Christianity.
No, okay.
And my immediate thought was, there's no pluralism in atheism, is there?
Well, I don't, okay, so if I said there's no pluralism in Christianity, then I misspoke. Or I don't know how that, like, that's not what I mean.
Oh, okay, it was on a slide.
So first of all, there's tons of pluralism in Christianity.
Yeah.
In this form of Christianity, it's not that there's no pluralism in it. It's that the system itself rejects the idea of pluralism. So like, where's my camera? Political polytheism. Pluralism is cast as polytheistic. And so I'm not, it wasn't my assessment. First of all, it's not all of Christianity, it's the smaller part. And the smaller part, it's not my assessment that they have no pluralism. It's their ideological commitment that pluralism is bad, is what I was trying to say. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, but I'm also comparing it to atheism. Atheists, in my understanding, don't tolerate any religion. So there's no pluralism. There's no variety of atheism, is there?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think, again, you get back to this issue of how you're defining atheist. And so, okay, so if you want to evaluate how much pluralism there is in this group, you've got to decide where you're going to put the boundaries, what makes the group, okay? So I've got some friends on Twitter who call themselves atheists, who are they're very adamant that atheism is too small a group to be able to accomplish the kinds of things that are necessary. And they work diligently to build bridges with various religious groups and people who wish to embrace pluralism. I don't even call myself an atheist. So I don't know where you make that category, but it seems, and that doesn't mean I'm a theist. It means that to me, the question of theism or atheism is still a Christian question. Hold on, I'm going to close this door. Excuse me.
Okay. All right.
See if that helps.
In the meantime, we'll listen to the dog explain what's going on outside.
It's a squirrel.
It's a squirrel, of course. All right.
So you don't make an identity out of things that aren't real, right? So I'm not an a-unicornist. So I'm not really an atheist either, because like that framing comes out of a Christian world that says the most important question is whether or not there's a God. And I don't even think that's an important question anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
So I don't know who that group is.
I'd like to say, I don't think atheists as a group are trying to impose their rule on everyone else, which is what these fundamentalists are trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Steve, Karen, do you have a follow-up or you okay?
No, I think that answered my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Are there other questions? If not, I have one. Does anybody have one?
I had one.
Oh, okay. Fred. Oh, Fred, and then Bud, and then go ahead, Fred.
What's this? You're talking about how they're these type of Christians are hostile to authority, but then there's a kind of dichotomy because they want to impose. When they have this, they like the Trump flags. They apparently idolize Trump. They practically worship him almost. Mm-hmm. They want his authority over everyone else. So they say, well, we don't want your secular authority over me. That's pointless. But I want his authority over all of you. So it's kind of like,
I agree. Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
Okay. You good, Fred?
Yeah.
All right. It's nice. That was easy. Yes.
Yeah.
Bud.
I once wrote a poem. I'm not a poem, don't understand poetry or anything else, but this is kind of the way it went. If I could start a religion, truth would be its deity, but the cardinal sin would be in the presumption of ever finding it. Each of us lives in the world of each other. You live in my world, and I live in your world. but no two of us live in the same world. Maybe in your world, there's a God. In my world, there's no God. So we just live in different worlds.
Very nice, Bud. Yeah, that's really good. I liked it. I liked the presentation and delivery too. Wow. Anybody want to comment on Bud's poem? Do you know who wrote that poem?
Me.
You did. I thought so. Very good. Very good, Bud. I love it. Thank you, Bud.
Well, it changes each time I say it, but it's always approximately the same.
That's fantastic. Well, Julie, where are you? I lost you on my screen. Thank you for sharing. Oh, I have a question for you. What is the name of your dog?
My dog's name is Dirigo.
Oh, amazing. Now I have a more serious question. And then we're going to go to David and then Jeanette and anyone else everybody gets to speak. So we've got plenty of time. But I would hope we could get people, everybody speaks once before anybody speaks twice. But if you don't have a question, then we're going to go to people who've already asked. So Julie, earlier on, you said the form of their thinking is rationalistic. And you kind of made that very clear, the form of their thinking. And I think there was kind of categorized by the evangelicals. But the way they reach their conclusion is rationalistic. You were trying to suggest that it might be similar, at least my interpretation, and correct me, is it's similar to what a free thought society might do in processing their thoughts and reaching a conclusion. Yet, while the form is the same, and we were dealing with different sets of facts, if we're both dealing with facts at all, and reaching different conclusions, but the process is similar. Do I understand you correctly? And if not, can you clarify that?
No, I think so. That's what I think I mean. But that leaves me wondering if that goes somewhere for you that I don't yet understand. But I believe that that's what I think. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay, so I think that for one thing, the different starting frameworks determines a different outcome, right? So they start with a Bible and a belief in a deity that reveals things, right? You don't start with those things. So even if the form of the so there is a logical, rational process associated with biblical hermeneutics. There are even entire, not everybody does it well, but there are entire scholarly disciplines about, and it's not that different from the rational scholarly discipline that you find in legal circles, right? There's a rational quality to that. That doesn't mean that I think that their conclusions are accurate or well reasoned, but I was pointing to the process.
Right, I understood that. And I'm glad you also added that where you start is very important, because one of the things that I've always wondered is who was the first person to imagine God? And I don't know who that is, but to me, it's an imaginary creation. And I understand it gives a lot of people a lot of comfort, and a lot of money has been made over the years. A lot of people have been killed in the name of God, but still it's make-believe to me, where the people in the, who call themselves free thinkers rallied against all that centuries ago, and don't start with something that is essentially a make-believe concept, unless it's that's the concept of content in which you're going to chat. So let's go.
Although the idea of a deity is so pervasive across cultures and through history, we're kind of the exception. So I suspect that the burden of proof is on us, or the burden of the argument there. There's some really interesting stuff in kind of cultural evolution about how humans, part of the way we think is to look for agency, right? Something happens and we try to look to see what caused it. So we're kind of wired to imagine a cause as necessary. And my guess is that that theism came from those kinds of sort of cognitive processes that are inherent to how our brains work. Because it was only, it's only all the ancient cultures that we know of had lots and lots of deities, right?
Right.
And they were, I think we're kind of the exception.
Okay. All right. We could have a conversation a long time, but let's go to David. David 2, it says David Schrombert, Dr. David Schrombert, professor.
I don't know why I'm David too, but anyway. And what's interesting is you just anticipated part of my question, and I'm going to try not to get too academic, but there is a psychological feature of human behavior called apophenia, where you seek patterns where there may not be any patterns. And I think this affects a lot of people. It's not just the hard right, people who are glommed onto an ideology like hardcore libertarians or Marxists, or, they don't have to be religious. But even then there's a tendency to see conspiracy theories, conspiracies of great corporations together, if you're a Marxist or, whatever. And so that's always been there. And what puzzles me is just the extremity of this phenomenon and the weirdness of this phenomenon now on the hard right. It's never seemed to be, there have always been, nut jobs and conspiracy theorists,
Right.
but now it's so much widespread, and so many people can buy into the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton and Obama being involved in cannibalism and trafficking. I mean, what accounts for the intensity and the spread of it, as opposed to just the normal nuttiness of it, which always existed everywhere on the spectrum?
Well, first, with regard to the notion of pattern seeking, so part of what I taught religion and popular culture this past term, and we did a whole thing on conspiracies. And one of the other days was about these kind of cognitive processes that humans innately have that serve lots of purposes, but lend themselves to conspiracy thinking. And the being pattern seeking animals is one part of that, right? It's not bad that we seek patterns, actually. It's part of how we think, and it's part of how we order the world, and it's part of how we do science, right? So it's important. But it can lead us into these other kinds of concerns. When you ask like what's different, certainly social media is an important component of this. It seems to me, we just had this perfect storm with Donald Trump as a compromise candidate and the influence of foreign governments that want to infiltrate the US and make things bad here. The kind of out of control social media, just seems like it all came together in this way that was really, really detrimental. And I don't really think it's Trump, to be honest. The rest of those people are still out there, and they're still doing all their stuff. It's not over just having gotten Trump out of office, for sure.
David,
did I answer? It seems like there were 3 parts, and I think I missed one.
Yeah, David, do you have a follow-up?
Well, it's not just, I have my own attempts at explanation or speculation is about what happens. And a lot of the things fit in with what you said. But if you go back to 2016, there was a general rejection of the establishment from the left and the right. That's what Bernie Sanders was also, was a rejection of the establishment. But I'm just, why isn't that craziness on the left? Why is it only on the right? And why is it so outlandishly crazy? Ordinarily, an average person isn't going to believe in cannibalism and sex trafficking circles in this way. They didn't believe it in the 60s. Even the John Birch Society never said anything like that. Why the extremity of it? That's what I'm.
Well, if you go back like to the 20s with the anti-Catholicism, there was stuff about child molestation and nuns who got impregnated by priests, and they killed the babies and they buried them in the churches, and there was a lot of that stuff. And then you had the kind of the
anti-Semitism tropes are like that.
Yes, yeah. And you had that Satanism scare in the 80s. So the idea of children as the sort of defenseless victims and that rhetoric getting mobilized to attack a group of people, that's an old trope, but it took on more. It took on more weight. I mean, it spread everywhere because of social media. I do think that the left and the right, we're just different from each other. You know, most people there's some great studies about how people socially sort themselves. You know, people who tend to be Democrats and tend to be more left like to live in cities around people who are different from them. And people who tend to be conservative want to live in a gated community where all the houses are the same and the people are all the same. Right? So there are ways in which we sort ourselves that lend themselves to different ways of being in the world. We're different from them. I think we are.
Yeah, but they're also different from us.
Oh, but who's more different?
Thanks.
Okay. Jeanette, your virtual hand is up. Do you have a question?
Well, since you've gotten through everybody that had asked, I wanted to go back to one of the questions I wanted to ask, because there are more studies coming out. I shouldn't say studies, but surveys coming out that are indicating the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, nuns, are growing dramatically. It's the highest percentage of non-affiliated questioning ever in a recent survey. And I was trying to find it while David was just talking so I could actually reference the survey.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that interesting, and I was wondering if, you know, that's where I'm placing my hope, is that I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, and then it will get better. I just have to believe that. I hope. I don't know. You know, and I go back to Carl Sagan's pale blue dot, you know, and that sort of centers me back. I mean, I'm just one little person on a tiny little moat.
Mm-hmm.
And a cosmic universe. It's
all right.
Anyway.
Julie, do you have a response?
I hope Jeanette's right.
Okay, all right, very good.
I do.
Other comments or questions from other people? We have anybody wants to say something that we haven't heard from? Because there's lots of people that I know want to speak, and we're going to get to everybody, even if we do people 2 or 3 times. It's good conversation. Let's go to Bud. Bud, you had your hand up?
Yeah.
Do you have another poem?
I think Jeanette is right, and about we are winning, and that is the reason we see the desperation on the other side, because that is what it is desperation. Mm-hmm. And if I may, I didn't finish my poem.
Okay, good.
There's each of us lives in the world of each other, but no 2 of us live in the same world, except perhaps at the here and now of a relative where's and whens. But perhaps in those depths, everywhere is then eternal. So I don't know if that makes any more sense. But anyway, that's it.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you, Bud. I appreciate that. Thank you. I really do. I love it. Let's go back to Henry, then David, and then open it up to everybody else. It's always open to everybody. I've got a few more questions myself. Henry.
Hey, I know we were talking just a minute ago about sort of what's different about today in terms of the intensity. And you cited social media as being one of the causes. I guess the ability to self-publish and get information out there and have it kind of exist and have people glom onto it quickly. I guess one of my questions is, we talk a bit sort of in the broader society about censorship. And of course, Facebook, I think, started banning President Trump's tweeting at one point. I think when all the crazy sort of jumped over to Parler might have shut down. So I guess my thought is, are we doing good by shutting these platforms down? Because one, it's a cat and mouse game, right? They'll always find another platform to get to. And then 2, it just kind of further feeds into the paranoia and the sense of persecution on their part that I feel like only hardens their resolve. and kind of keeps the fire burning a little hot. So just kind of a general statement / thought on that.
Okay. Julie?
It's
You
a
have
big problem. It's a big question. I don't have a good answer.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah, we've got to figure that out.
Okay, there you go, Henry. I mean,
Yeah.
well, Henry,
Down with Henry.
Henry, let me ask you a question. Henry,
Yeah.
Henry, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
How do you
Yeah.
answer your own question?
I almost feel like we're better off kind of letting them do what they do and have the rhetoric be out in the open, rather than almost, I think there's a technique they call fogging, where when you're up against someone who's opposing your thought, you kind of, instead of reaching out to them and sort of meeting them where they are and being aggressive and refuting what they say, you just sort of let them fulminate, let them have their moment, and hope that sort of the very act, I guess, of letting them speak and be heard is enough to get them to kind of simmer down. I don't know, just the thought. And part of that is, it's probably my personality too. I tend to be very laid back, and I want everyone to at least feel like they have had an opportunity to sort of speak their piece, even if we don't agree.
Okay, thank you, Henry.
Yeah.
Mark Madonis from California, the West Coast on the Western Slope.
Yeah. Deep in the heart of Silicon Valley. Yeah, I was curious. You mentioned on one of your slides about the intersection between the end of slavery and the Southern Baptist Conference. I was curious about intersections between the various spikes in evangelical radicalization at different points in racial change, the Jim Crow, the civil rights, the Obama presidency, and so forth.
Well, so, evangelicalism isn't a denomination, right? It's kind of a movement or an identification. It's a sort of, it's a cultural approach to a particular kind of Protestantism. So American churches that fall into this evangelical thread split in the immediate years preceding the Civil War. And so this is why you have the Baptists were the group. If you wanted to go back to the founders and look at who was most in favor of a separation of church and state, it was actually the Baptists. But you had this transformation of the Baptist tradition because of its cult. I don't see religion as existing apart from culture, right? So in the South, it was developed in the context of slaveholding, and it developed this social hierarchy as ordained by God kind of theology. So and the Southern Presbyterians were the same, the Southern Methodists were the same, and this is why you have sort of why you have Northern Baptists and American Baptists and Southern Baptists. That's why those denominations are divided like that. The Presbyterians and the Methodists reunited in the 1980s, but you had the versions of those denominations that split away in defense of slavery maintained those kinds of justifications for racial division going through the Jim Crow era and going through the segregation era and going through, busing well into the 1970s. And there's some pretty good argument to be made that the Christian school movement was founded, it was at least founded at the same time as the busing controversies, trying to integrate public schools. There's argument around how much that was a factor, but it was certainly at least some factor. So conservative American Protestantism has never escaped its roots in the slaveholding tradition. And I am increasingly of the opinion that American culture broadly still hasn't escaped that history. You find it more explicitly present in some places than in others. But, who was it? Was it Lincoln that called that our original sin? And of course, Malcolm X said it, we had chickens coming home to roost. Yeah, I think it's inseparable from American culture broadly and from various aspects of Christianity specifically. Does that answer your question?
Would you, any follow-up, Mark? Are you okay?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, right. Let's Diane Shear. You're muted, so if you have a question, unmute yourself, please.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you. You know, it's clear that this whole evangelical right, once Trump was in office, I mean, this clearly gave them something to coalesce around, something to give them a voice. And so much noise, right, has happened since then and during the Trump administration. My question for Julie is, prior to having an available Messiah, right, to coalesce around, what is your sense about whether the evangelical right was in fact growing or starting to fade out a little bit? Do you have a sense of how much the political issue really gave them a voice, and are they really bigger, or are they just sounding bigger because they have a Messiah now?
I don't know if they're bigger. Like, that's a difficult question. But the earlier book that came out in 2015 is really about how the evangelical right in the US now has its roots going all the way back to like the 1960s, and an effort to transform American culture, bringing everything under, as they said, the lordship of Christ, primarily through establishing Christian schools. And then that sort of evolved into the Christian homeschool movement. But those two things were part of what they called a 200-year plan to sort of, you know, this is going back to Henry's question about, it was Henry, right? Dominionism. This is dominion theology. And the idea is that they are called by God, going on in the book of Genesis, to exercise dominion over the whole world. And this is what they're about. And it's a long-term strategy. I mean, I think a lot of people miss their influence because they don't recognize the time horizon that these folks are working with. I don't know about, I don't know if I can say it's bigger, but I certainly think that it's more influential than it was 30 years
It's certainly
ago.
louder, yes.
And has more people in power, in positions of importance in the courts, and the, you know, I guess not in the executive branch right now, but, you know, I mean, people like Mike Pompeo, people like Mike Pence. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Diane, any follow-up? Any other comments or?
No, thank you. Thank you.
Diane, for being with us.
Thanks for the question, Diane.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Other comments or questions? I see, let me see. I see Bud, I see Fred, I see Susan's got a virtual hand up, and wait, what's going on here? Somebody had a hand up and then went down. I think she never spoke. So Wanda, there you go. Wanda, let's go to Wanda. Unmute yourself, Wanda, or get.
You know, I'm just gonna. I've not been to. I've been to one of the Free Thought meetings quite a few years ago, but several years ago now. But to identify myself, I'm actually a graduate of Liberty University.
Are you?
Oh, right.
Yes. Okay.
No, seriously.
My diploma. I was going to send it back, but it fell behind the bookcase and I never retrieved it. So, but you know, like none of this made sense to me given my training at Liberty, which I've long since left. The whole thought process is there, but there was that Gerald Falwell, the push to get people into power, which now I'm getting a little bit familiar with the Rushdoony and that kind of the whole dominion thing. And that's exactly what was being encouraged. And, but yet I was thinking, wait a second. Now for me, it was, I was an education major. So it seemed like to me, looking back at what I was in, but not understanding what I was in, that we were really encouraged to be in Christian schools. So it's funny. It's like we weren't really encouraged. I don't think I don't think I was being prepared. I ended up teaching 1 year in a Christian school and left and went into public school. But I remember when I went into public schools to begin teaching that I really didn't think I was trained to go into public schools, and it was kind of a little awkward. Like I was embarrassment. I was doing something embarrassing.
Mhm.
So that kind of the homeschooling thing and the Christian schooling thing was going on. This was back, I should identify the year. It was 77, 77, 78. So the fulfillment of what was being asked of people then, you know, the teachers, and they may have changed the view, but the teachers, we're being trained to teach in Christian schools to ward off this secularism. But the others were being encouraged to go into politics, to go into all walks of life, lawyers, yada, yada, yada. So, I mean, it was, I was in the middle of it without knowing what I was in the middle of. It's like, you know,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
you're in a field or you're in the yard and you go in the house, and it isn't until you go in the house do you realize you stepped in poo. And then you go,
You're right.
right in the middle of it. But I didn't know
So-
what I was in the middle of.
I think you were right in the middle of it, and your framing suggested to me that you thought that what you were saying was different than what I thought, but it's not. It's exactly what I would have thought. They believed that public education was unbiblical and should be dismantled, and they still believe it. So they're not going to train their daughters to go teach in public schools at all. They were trying to get all Christians to take their kids out of public education.
Well, the thing is that, you know, I was a product of public education. I wasn't a product of a Christian school. I went to what I would call evangelical school, and certainly went to church, and went to even more evangelical college. But once I was in the Christian school, I wasn't a good fit. So I didn't stay there very long, but I didn't know what I was, anyway, so.
No, it's very interesting. Now, where did you grow up?
In North Carolina.
Uh-huh.
So they're
Interesting.
not Baptist, but the Christian denomination, but Baptist wasn't a far leap. It's interesting though, in the Christian denomination, which of course I didn't understand any of this. I'm looking back and saying, oh, but the Christian denomination, I mean, we had a different preacher every year or so, because the ladies of the church, he'd do something they didn't like and he was gone. Never a she though. But then I got into Liberty Baptist University and realized that Jerry Falwell was the minister forever. And then it got bequeathed to his son. That's funny, Jonathan. And I was thinking, that would never have happened in my Christian church. They would have never lasted more than 3 years before somebody made somebody mad. So we never really had that human superiority, the authoritative figure.
I
But
see.
Trump fit nicely with that. Even though he was not fitting morally, he did fit nicely with the not taking any junk off anybody and saying, you know, he said things that they wouldn't say, but
Yeah.
they were behind him, letting him say these things. So anyway, that's that it was, I know looking back that it was well designed. They were training people to go into all of these walks of life and push forward the Christian agenda.
Julie, would you disagree with that, or you would
Not
agree?
at all. Nope.
Right, that's my understanding too.
What I would have expected. Yep.
I want to. Where'd Wanda go? I want to thank you for speaking up and being with us, because I think that's fantastic. And if anybody is not aware, just this week, Liberty University filed lawsuit against Jerry Falwell Jr. for sobriety issues, fraud, lots of things similar to what you might be talking about. When you're talking about back in the 70s, they were kind of new then. They were just getting off the ground. They started in the early 70s or late 60s. So
Yeah, I was 71, I believe. And I arrived at the school at 73.
right.
So very, lots smaller. It grew every year, though. It grew.
Now, this is what fascinates me, and this is something that Julie, I don't know if you talked about this in any kind of significant manner, but what fascinates me is the money that's involved and the money that is being able to be just literally raked in because you claim you have a path to God and life everlasting. Julie, would you like to speak to the money issue of all of this?
Well, Liberty in particular got a huge amount of public money to expand their campus, like millions. Yeah, it's tons of money involved, no doubt.
Right. Oh, yeah, tons.
Yep,
literally,
just tons.
physically, if we could weigh it, it would literally be tons of money. Okay. Fred, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. Well, I know the history that Jerry Falwell first became a public figure in the 1950s in opposition to Brown v. Board of Education. And because of that, he wanted to destroy public education. And that's his main motive in getting into media.
Yep.
And also I've read that, well, this in The Power Worshippers, a book I've read lately, that abortion, religious, you're right, they didn't much care about abortion as an issue at all until at some point in the early 70s, someone said, hey, that's an issue we could, after this year in 1973, Roe v. Wade. They took that as a big thing to make a big stink about, but they made an issue of it. What I've read, it hadn't been a big issue before. And but the other comment is about the trying to compromise with these people, because if anyone has read up on what led up to the Civil War, these people did not want to compromise. No. Lincoln was a kind of a compromiser. He said, hey, okay, I'm not going to touch it where it's already legal. I don't have the power to do that, but I'm going to oppose it spread into the territories. They said, that's horrible. We can't have this man as our president. We got to succeed and overthrow him and kill him if we can. There was no way to compromise with these fire breathers who dominated the many of these southern states. But and now we have these people that they don't want to compromise. Their idea of compromise is you do what we want you to do, or you do what we tell you to do, and you're not going to tell us to do anything. You keep doing with us, but we're going to hold stand to our principles. You give in, not us. And that's their idea of compromise.
Julie, any comments or remarks?
What do we do?
Julie?
Well, I'm just thinking about the Biden administration, and with the COVID relief package, they tried to compromise and made all kinds of changes and still got no Republican votes, right? And now the infrastructure bill, they're just like, well, we're just going to go forward without it, because they give up stuff and it doesn't get anything. You're right. There's no compromising.
Susan Erchter, you're muted.
Yeah. Okay. So somebody a while back asked about the internet and social media and banning Trump and banning other people that are spreading lies. And I wanted to throw my opinion in here that I think it's a good idea that we ban people. I used to be a big fan of John Stuart Mill, and we can have a public a market square where we all talk and put down the opinions that are bad, but spreading lies is a whole nother thing. And I think banning people is okay, because for one thing, so these crazy evangelicals are possibly growing. So how are they growing? They're growing by spreading their lies. So shouldn't we try to stop their lies? So I would like Dr. Ingersoll to talk about putting down stopping false theories, and we can not promote them on social media. Also, can we quit scaring the evangelicals? And is it even possible to quit scaring the evangelicals if they want to be persecuted. And why did the evangelicals support Trump? Was it the abortion, as Fred seemed to indicate, or was it just because they wanted judges to support them in the courts, or did they like it that Trump wanted to give our tax dollars to Christian schools? And then my other question is,
Susan. Oh my God.
I'm not going to remember them all.
I'm just going to make a joke. Susan, I mean, hey, Julie, did you get all that? Wait a minute.
And it's that's kind of what Wanda said is about the schools. It's like now like SB 48 is going to send more of our money to Christian schools, more to homeschooling, and we're not going to gather together in public schools and see one another. And I think that's really harmful. Thank you for taking my turn.
Okay.
Okay, let's see here.
You pick anything, you pick it and you respond as you see fit.
I think that, and I think even Henry will probably agree that there's a difference between like fact checking and eliminating stuff that's plainly false and eliminating opinions, right? So we could maintain a free market of ideas where everybody gets to express their opinions, but not necessarily allow people to post things that say that, you know, COVID is a hoax. There's maybe something there. I don't know. I mean, I do think it's really difficult, but I also know that you know, I have been always very reluctant to throw around labels like fascist and, well, let's just go with that one. Because and the reason, and I've said this over the years, is because when we need the term, we won't have it anymore. And I think we threw it around too much. And so we almost like, it's very hard to use that term because people mean all kinds of different things by it. And you sound just like you're being off the wall when you use it. But really I was reading this yesterday about Argentina. Part of the strategy is that you use democratic values and processes to bring down democracy. So maybe you have a broadly open free market for ideas, but there is a price for entry. And the price for entry is that you agree to the sort of basic premises of democracy and pluralism. But I don't know. I mean, I don't have good solutions for that. But I agree with you completely about the public funding going to Christian schools. It's already happening with the voucher system, and we're about to spend more of it. And a whole bunch of that COVID relief bill during the Trump administration went to fund public Christian schools. And you are right that part of the problem is that we don't have that common civic space any longer. But another part is that there's a school in my book. It's over in Niceville, Florida. It's getting all our public money. And it teaches creationism. It teaches that Christian American history, Christian nationalism. It teaches that women have to submit to men. It teaches all that stuff with public money. So it's partly that we've lost that public sphere for becoming a citizenry, but it's also partly just what they're teaching with tax dollars. And I've lost your other points. I'm sorry. I did pretty well though. I got the beginning and the end.
I think you covered them all. The other one was about why did evangelicals vote for Trump?
Oh, I have a great answer to that too. There's a wonderful book. It's called Jesus and John Wayne. And it answers that question. And it looks at the sort of transformation of our ideas about masculinity over the last 75, maybe 100 years in the US. Yep, it's a great book. Jesus and John Wayne. And that's the fundamental question is, how did this happen? And she says it was a feature, not a bug. So I just highly recommend that. Yes, Trump's family did go to Norman Vincent Peale's church. And you can still see the impact of that with his, when he has those religious advisors around him, they're almost always those prosperity gospel people that fit within that Norman Vincent Peale thread.
Very good. Thank you. Very thorough questioning, Susan. There's a lot there. Thank you, Julie, for doing that. Other questions? Harry Parrott. Doc, hello, Harry Parrott. Good to see you, and thank you for joining us. You're muted, Harry. If you're trying to unmute, that's great.
Can you hear me now?
We can
Yes.
hear you now. Boy, Verizon, if they only had that keep running right now, we'd be on the air every day. Can you
Yes.
hear me now? Go ahead, Harry, you're on.
I want to say hello to you all.
Hi, Harry. Long time no
Yes,
see.
I may be the only Baptist minister tuned in here, huh?
You might be.
Welcome.
Yes, and I want to thank Julie for making the point at the very beginning.
You're very
of-
welcome. I make that
Making
point
the-
whenever I can.
At the very beginning of your remarks, you said that the people you are talking about represent a particular point of view within Christianity. And I want to underscore that everything you've said tonight, as far as I'm concerned, is right on target, right on target. And I
Thank you.
read that book that's on the shelf behind you, Building God's Kingdom. I read that book. So I know all about Rush Dooney and the rest of them. And I'm looking forward to your next book.
So am I.
Yeah, and I want you to know that there are many of us within the faith, within our faith, who are on your side in most of these things, and are on the side of the Free Thought Society in many of their concerns as well. So anyway, thank you very much. And I want to underscore what many have said, that I think our country in the last 4 years was on the ragged edge of something very, very, very bad.
I think so too.
And we are lucky that we have made ourselves out of it, come out of it, as well as we have so far. But we're not out of the woods at all.
Mm-mm.
So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry.
Oh, that's fantastic, Harry. I'm very happy you're here. Good to see you again. It's been a long time. I'm thrilled that you're willing to speak up too, and thanks for that. Other comments or questions? Let's go to Karen and Steve. Karen and Steve, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm unmuted now, okay? Yeah, I had two sort of statements, which are sort of questions. You can, in other words, they're statements and you can react to them. I think there's some generalities going on, like conflicting or combining things. Like there were about 60 or 70 million people who voted for Trump. And then you're talking about a very small minority of Christians who are evangelicals and who believe in this, what you're talking about. So I think, maybe you can clear that up for me, because I don't think we're talking about 60 million evangelicals. And the second point is I just feel strongly about the First Amendment. And I think, we should all be free to talk. And I really am against censorship. And if we, the radical right says the radical left is for fascism and control of everything and socialism. And then if we respond by censoring people and take, we're actually, we're doing what they say they're accusing of. So, I think taking away freedom of speech and censoring people is actually the wrong thing to do.
I just want to say, I didn't say we were going to censor people. I said that social media doesn't need to give them a platform. And I think that's two different things. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Julie, would you like to make a
well,
remark?
the reason in my first three little preliminaries, the caveats included that it's not all Christians by any means. In fact, in the US, the largest kind of Christian is a Catholic. So evangelicals are not even the biggest. They're not a denomination. It's more of a culture that trans versus denominations. They certainly non-evangelicals voted for Trump, but the best statistics I have in terms of responding is that some 81% of self-identified evangelicals voted for Trump, and that his support among them remained that high through his presidency and even the post-presidency. So you have the highest number of people now in evangelicalism that think that the election was stolen, that think that COVID was a hoax, that don't wear masks, that won't get vaccines, like all that stuff kind of hangs together. But I absolutely agree with you. It's not even all evangelicals, let alone all Christians. Yeah. But on the other point, I think I agree with you. I don't believe in censorship. But at the same time, I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know. It seems to me, I mean, Susan's right. It's censorship is when the government bans certain people from speaking.
Right.
Social pressure on private groups like Facebook and Twitter to fact check and put warnings and to, have terms of use and ban people who violate the terms of use. Those all seem to me fair game. So I guess there's got to be some middle ground between not doing anything and censoring. I don't know.
Well,
but I'm not the one to resolve that anyway.
I'd like to respond.
Okay.
The problem with it is there hasn't been social media before. There were only presses or newspapers, and that was the only source of information. And the Russians during the Soviet Union period, they had an expression as non to be neobliga. No, I'm sorry, that's wrong. And I won't say it in Russian. It says there's no truth in the news, and there's no news in the truth. And Pravda is the truth, and Izvestia was the news. So they didn't believe their own media. Now we have an alternative. We have social media, and unless that gets the same control as news, it is censorship if the private companies censor people, and there are protective law. They're protected. The social media is protected. If they get classified as a publisher, then they could be sued if they print untruths, and they could be sued for libel and so forth. So I think, if right now they're protected, they shouldn't be protected, and we shouldn't be censoring people. That's just my very strong opinion.
Right. Right. The question is who gets to do it and how do we effectively combat lies that are not true?
It shouldn't be the government. In other
Well,
words,
that's what the First Amendment suggests, that it should not be the government. That's what all of those lawsuits are about when they're talking about free speech lawsuits.
Who decides what the truth is?
That's me.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Who has? Let's see. David, you had your hand up and you put it down. Is that true?
Yeah, I was gonna. The Leibowitz has said something about what I was going to say, but part of the problem is we have an allergy to regulation, and so far, one of the problems with social media is that they are private corporations, but they have become sort of like the telephone, meaning it's the way everybody communicates. And so there is no convention as to what covers it. So each platform is going to make their own decisions, and that's not necessarily good. So that's one thing. We have to have some sort of convention that says just what the responsibility is of the platforms to the public now that it has become almost like replacing telephones. and we have to get over our allergy on that. And it's not regulation of speech, it's regulation of what it means to be a social platform. And the other thing is, as far as the public conversation goes on these, the problem is Russia and China and North Korea, but the problem is Russia. And if we eliminated that, the way that they have amped up all of the animosity is one of the things that contributed to the fact that we can't have a normal conversation. So, you know, we have to metaphorically castrate Putin. And then when the evangelicals get on the platforms or whatever, then it's much more of a level playing field and it's not distorted by all these artificial algorithms with an agenda. But I tend to agree with Steve that, you know, we have to really worry about what it really means to have free speech. So we can't go overboard with, you know, just letting Zuckerberg decide, all right, these are the rules. It shouldn't be up to Zuckerberg. He's an asshole also. It should be a convention.
It should be a convention. Interesting.
A convention, you have to have rules. What does it mean to be social media? And if it's like telephone that everybody uses, then there's a limit to what kind of restrictions Zuckerberg can decide or put on. Mm-hmm. That's what I mean.
Okay. Cool. Just a quick show of hands. Anybody here in favor of a constitutional convention? Show of hands. A new one? Show of hands. I'm going to put my hand up. I'm in favor of it because I would love the entertainment value of it. I think it would be.
What might happen? They may make it far worse than the one we have now.
It could. I don't think we'd ever get it completed. Julie, do you want to make any remarks to what was said in the past few minutes?
I don't want a constitutional convention. I'm on next door. I know who my neighbors are. Oh,
yeah,
no.
Well, all the evangelicals will show up and all the normal
That's exactly
people will stay home.
No, we don't need that.
Yeah.
Not right now.
Why is it? That's a problem, isn't it? What
it is a problem.
Why is it? Is that characterized as apathy? What is that characterized as?
Apathy, not knowing the system, who organizes their organization best. You know, in the old days, in the early part of the 20th centuries, the best organized political party, bar none, everywhere in the world was the Communist Party. They were never as big as they claimed to be, but because they were the best organized, they seemed to show up everywhere, and they took far more control over processes, over agreements, etc. And they are anti-democratic, but they were organized. And the evangelicals are the same way. They're the communists of the left. Okay. In that sense.
All right, we're running out of time. We've got a few minutes to close this down. This is the last chance for anybody that wants to make a comment or a question for Julie. We've got about 3 minutes left. Huddle. Huddle. You're muted, Huddle. Unmute yourself.
Okay, here we go.
There you go. Good job.
Hi.
I want to say that it seems that lately the evangelicals are getting a lot of press and a lot of news. But even on that, there's another level though where they're doing very grassroots level. They're going into school boards and city councils and working on that level too. It's kind of scary to me.
Well, it is. And if you remember that quote I showed you from Gary North saying that what has to happen is that at every level of the school board in particular, he talked about, we've got to get these people, these dominionists elected. You're right. It's
very good.
That's part of the plan.
All right.
Super quick comment.
Could everybody unmute themselves at this moment? Would you be willing to unmute yourself at this? If you don't have to, but I'm just asking you to do it. If you're willing to do it, what I'd like to do is close this out at this moment and show a round of applause to Julie and thank her very much for coming. This way she can hear our claps, and thank you. Julie, before we actually say goodnight and goodbye, would you like to sum up what your experience with us was tonight and what you would certainly like us to take away, other than buying your books on Amazon, which are available there, which I encourage everybody to go check them out. So go ahead, Julie.
Oh, it's just delightful to be able to spend some time with a inquisitive reading group of people that can have a conversation even amongst disagreement. It's just really, really fun for me. I've missed this over the last year. I'm just gonna hope that Jeanette, I'm just going with Jeanette on all this stuff. I lean on my optimistic friends, so.
Very good, very good. Well, from me to you and from on behalf of the
Thank
First
you.
Coast Free Thought
My
Society,
pleasure.
well done. Thank you very much. And maybe one day I'll see you on the road in Maine. Who knows?
Could be.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I do
Remember
travel
our motto, the question is the answer.
the question is the answer. That's right. Very good. Thanks, everybody. Madeline, are you with us still? It's your chance. It's your chance to shine, Madeline. Madeline
I get to
gets
kick
shut it all
everyone
down.
off.
Yes. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. And for all everybody
Right.
new, thanks for joining us. Hope to
Nice
see you
to
next
see you
week.
all.
Bye now.
All right, have a good night.